cry was pinched off short as the blood-warm waters of the Caribbean Sea doused over his head. He struggled up to the surface and tried to cry out, but the wash from the speeding yacht slapped him in the face, and the salt water in his open mouth made him gag and strangle. Desperately, he struck out with strong strokes after the receding lights of the yacht, but he stopped before he had swung faint. A certain cool-headedness had come to him. It was not the first time he had been in a tight place. There was a chance that his cries could be heard by someone aboard the yacht, but that chance was slender and grew more slender as the yacht raced on. He wrestled himself out of his clothes and shouted with all his power. The lights of the yacht became faint and ever-vanishing fireflies. Then they were blotted out entirely by the night. Rainsford remembered the shots. They had come from the right, and doggedly he swam in that direction, swimming with slow, deliberate strokes, conserving his strength. For a seemingly endless time he fought the sea. He began to count his strokes. He could do possibly 100 more, and then Rainsford heard a sound. It came out of the darkness, a high screaming sound, the sound of an animal in an extremity of anguish and terror. He did not recognize the animal that made the sound. He did not try to. With fresh vitality, he swam toward the sound. He heard it again. Then it was cut short by another noise. Crisp, staccato. Pistol shot, muttered Rainsford, swimming on.
So after reading the first page of The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, we're already seeing the exposition where we introduce the setting and the characters. Now, the protagonist of the story, the main character who we focus on, is a chap called Rainsford. Now, he's a hunter. The exposition says that he's on his way to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. He's going to go hunting jaguar in the Amazon. Now, how is Rainsford characterised in the beginning? He's shown to be quite an apathetic person. He doesn't really care about the animals he kills or the animals he hunts. He says things like, "Who cares how a jaguar feels?" But they've got no understanding. And when his friend says, I think they fear pain, I think they fear death, he laughs. It's like nonsense. So Rainsford's characterised as a bit of an apathetic person who doesn't care or empathise with the animals he kills. We also see lots of imagery describing what they are, particularly the night time. So the night is described with lots of beautiful imagery that really allows us to picture the scene. Um, the similes, as metaphors, there's personification. It's called a dank tropical night. Dank has very negative connotations. Um, it's pressed, it's thick, warm blackness upon the earth. It's like black velvet, he says. Um, One of the other sailors says it's like the air was actually poisonous. There's no breeze, it seems as flat as a plate glass window. So there's lots of imagery describing nature, and particularly the night. There was no sound in the night. As sat there with a muffled throb of the engine that drove past the yard swiftly through the darkness of the swish ripple of the wash of the propeller. Again, lots of beautiful imagery that allows us to really picture the scene. The sensuous drowsiness of the night was on him. I could sleep without closing the night. My eyes at night will be my eyelids again. What do you think the night can symbolise? Just track how the night is described throughout the story. Is it described positively or negatively? He's not trying to see through a blanket, he says. And he describes the waters as blood warm. Now, what happens here is they're obviously sailing to Brazil. Something happens. He goes to smoke his pipe. He hears a gunshot. It startles him. He falls overboard. The wash of the speeding yacht slapped him in the face. It's also personification describing nature in this story. Why do you think that could be? What do you think? There are several conflicts in the story. What could one of the conflicts be? So he's stuck in the water and he starts to swim towards where he had the gunshots. He swims towards the island. He fought the sea. Again, more personification. Nature is described as quite brutal. The lights of the yacht became ever vanishing fireflies that were blotted out entirely by the night. So, like I say, really try to keep track of how nature is described, how the night is described. Think about what the night can symbolise, what might its importance be. And there's one quote I really want to highlight on this page. The world is made up of two classes. The hunters, those who
don't
hunt,
catch
and the
himself.
hunted, those who are hunted. Just
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
it one in your minds.
Yeah. It's good.
10 minutes of determined effort brought another sound to his ears, the most welcome he had ever heard, the muttering and growling of the sea breaking on a rocky shore. He was almost on the rocks before he saw them. On a night less calm, he would have been shattered against them. With his remaining strength, he dragged himself from the swirling waters. Jagged crags appeared to jut up into the opaqueness. He forced himself upward, hand over hand. Gasping, his hands raw, he reached a flat place at the top. Dense jungle came down to the very edge of the cliffs. What perils that tangle of trees and underbrush might hold for him did not concern Ravenspur just then. All he knew was that he was safe from his enemy, the sea, and that utter weariness was on him. He flung himself down at the jungle edge and tumbled headlong into the deepest sleep of his life. When he opened his eyes, he knew from the position of the sun that it was late in the afternoon.
Right.
A sharp hunger was picking at him. He looked about him, almost cheerfully. Where there are pistol shots, there are men. Where there are men, there's food, he thought. kind of men, he wondered, in so forbidding a place? An unbroken front of snarled and ragged jungle fringed the shore. He saw no sign of a trail through the closely knit web of weeds and trees. It was easier to go along the shore, and Rainsford floundered along by the water. Not far from where he landed, he stopped. Some wounded thing, by the evidence a large animal, had thrashed about in the underbrush. The jungle weeds were crushed down, and the moss was lacerated. One patch of weeds was stained crimson. A small, glittering object not far away caught Rainsford's eye, and he picked it up. It was an empty cartridge. A .22, he remarked. That's odd. Must have been a fairly large animal, too. The hunter had his nerve with him to tackle it with a light gun. It's clear that the brute put up a fight. Suppose the first 3 shots I heard was when the hunter flushed his quarry and wounded it. The last shot was when he trailed it here and finished it. He examined the ground closely and found what he had hoped to find, the print of hunting boots. They pointed along the cliff in the direction he had been going. Eagerly he hurried along, on a rotten log or a loose stone, but making headway. Night was beginning to settle down on the island. Bleak darkness was blacking out the sea and jungle when Rainsford sighted the lights. He came upon them as he turned a crook in the coastline, and his first thought was that he had come upon a village where there were many lights. But as he forged along, he saw to his great astonishment that all the lights were in one enormous building, a lofty structure with pointed towers plunging upward into the gloom. His eyes made out the shadowy outlines of a palatial chateau. It was set on a high bluff, and on 3 sides of it, cliffs dived down to where the sea licked greedy lips in the shadows. Mirage, thought Rainsford. But it was no mirage he found when he opened the tall spiked iron gate. The stone steps were real enough. The massive door with a leering gargoyle for a knocker was real enough. Yet above it all hung an air of unreality. He lifted the knocker, and it crept up stiffly, as if it had never before been used. He let it fall, and it startled him with its booming loudness. He thought he heard steps within. The door remained closed. Again Rainsford lifted the heavy knocker and let it fall. The door opened then, opened as suddenly as if it were on a spring, and Rainsford stood blinking in the river of glaring gold light that poured out. The first thing Rainsford's eyes discerned was the largest man Rainsford had ever seen, a gigantic creature, solidly made and black-bearded to the waist. In his hand, the man held a long-barreled revolver, and he was pointing it straight at Rainsford's heart. Out of the snarl of beard, 2 small eyes regarded Rainsford. Don't be alarmed, said Rainsford, with a smile which he hoped was disarming. I'm no robber. I fell off a yacht. My name is Sanger Rainsford of New York City. The menacing look in the eyes did not change, the revolver pointing as rigidly as if the giant were a statue. He gave no sign that he understood Rainsford's words, or that he had even heard them. He was dressed in uniform, a black uniform trimmed with gray astrakhan. I'm Sanger Rainsford of New York, Rainsford began again. I fell off a yacht. I am hungry. The man's only...
Значит, that's Wi-Fi такой. cold night in October.
Hungry. The man's only answer was to raise with his thumb the hammer of his revolver. Then Rainsford saw the man's free hand go to his forehead in a military salute, and he saw him click his heels together and stand at attention. Another man was coming down the broad marble steps, an erect, slender man in evening clothes. He advanced to Rainsford and held out his hand. In a cultivated voice marked by a slight accent that gave it added precision and deliberateness, he said, "It is a very great pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Sanger Rainsford, the celebrated hunter, to my home." Automatically, Rainsford shook the man's hand. "I've read your book about hunting snow leopards in Tibet, you see," explained the man. "I am General Zaroff." Rainsford's first impression was that the man was singularly handsome. His second was that there was an original, almost bizarre quality about the general's face. He was a tall man past middle age, for his hair was vivid white, but his thick eyebrows and pointed military mustache were as black as the night from which Rainsford had come. His eyes, too, were black and very bright. He had high cheekbones, a sharp-cut nose, a spare, dark face, the face of a man used to giving orders, the face of an aristocrat. Turning to the giant in uniform, the general made a sign. The giant put away his pistol, saluted, withdrew. "Ivan is an incredible," remarked the general, "but he has the misfortune to be deaf and dumb. A simple fellow, but I'm afraid, like all his race, a bit of a savage." "Like all his race, a bit of a savage." "Is he Russian?" "He is a Cossack," said the general, and his smile showed red lips and pointed teeth. "So am I." "Come," he said.
Dude, it's honest. It's true to this day.
"We shouldn't be chatting here. We can talk later. Now you want clothes, food, rest. You shall have them. This is a most restful spot." Ivan had reappeared, and the general spoke to him with lips that moved but gave forth no sound.
So as I said, really focus on and pay attention to how the setting, how the scenery, nature is described in this story. Look at the imagery. There is a lot of personification, the muttering and the growling of the sea. He was safe from his enemy, the sea. An unbroken from snarled, a ragged jungle snarling. It's very there's animal imagery. Um, what's important about all this?
Savior, from my Lord and Savior.
What's important about all this bleak darkness was blacking out the sea in the jungle. The sea licked green lips in the shadows. What is important about this description of nature? Could it be that nature is one of the conflicts in the story, and that Rainsford must overcome this natural conflict? As well, let's see how Rainsford is described here. He forced himself upward hand over hand. He knew, he says things like, whether a pistol shots are many, obviously a very resourceful character. He is clearly a skilled hunter. He knew the 22 type of gun,
Das
type of bullet size, basically 22, so it must have been a fairly large animal. So he's characterised as this very resourceful character. I also want to highlight one thing, where he finds this spot where an animal was clearly killed. He says that the weeds were stained crimson. Now, crimson is a word, it's a red colour, but it is going to be used again in the story. Red does begin to symbolise something.
سلام بچه ها، صبحتون بخیر. امیدوارم که خوب باشید. یکی دو دقیقه صبر کنیم که بقیه هم به ما ملحق شن و به قول شاهد هانگر گیمز رو شروع بکنیم.
من میرفت اون ور کوتیشن خواه همسر
Big lofty structure towards towers plunging upward into the gloom. So how is this big palatial chateau, this big palace-like castle described? It's a very gothic description. There's a spiked iron gate, there's a gargoyle.
سپاین گیت بهتر هم میشه واسه عالیه ولی بهتر هم میشه.
بسیار خوب. Last session we talked about different types of irony. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about conflict in stories. Conflict یا اون چیزی که به فارسی بهش میگن کشمکش has got two types, external
internal.
and internal. Mainly, we've got three different types of conflict in literature. We've got man against man, which is one kind of external conflict in which two characters go through some sort of challenge or some sort of ideological conflict in a story. So it is between one character and another. Then we've got man against nature or environment, which is another sort of conflict in which a character at the heart of some natural scene or in the face of a natural disaster tries to survive or to move on in his life. For example, imagine a person trapped in a very massive field filled with snow, trying to move on towards his destination, or when he tries to survive a desert, or for example, when he is in challenge and conflict with some sort of social restrictions or social obligations, regulations, conventions, whatever that is imposed upon him from outside. So this is also another kind of external conflict. And then we've got an example of internal conflict, which is man against himself, in which a person is involved in some sort of conflict, emotionally, mentally, morally, trying to get in terms with something he's experiencing, or something that is taking place, or awakening in him. So, having said this, I want you to tell me, what types of conflict do we have in The Most Dangerous Game? Mohammed, can you give me examples? Any type that you mentioned, can you provide the example as well?
Yeah, all of them. ما في أنا بس ما أنا بشتغل. لا مش
I'm looking for examples. Okay, Charizard, man against man with Rainsford versus Zaroff. Yes, Mohammed, man against nature, Rainsford in the jungle. So you're all right. So we've got examples of all three types of conflict in the story. From the beginning of the story, or near the beginning of the story, we have this heated conversation between Rainsford and Whitney, in which the idea of hunting and it's being the best sport in the world is introduced to the readers. Rainsford believes that hunting is the best sport in the world, and Whitney says, for the hunter. And then through this conversation, we begin to get familiarized with the ideology of Rainsford as a hunter and as a character in general. So this is also an example of man against man, whereas we see Rainsford versus Zaroff as a more prominent example of man against man. This conversation reveals another example of man against man in the story, the conflict between Whitney and Rainsford in how they view the nature of hunting. Then, moving on, we see Rainsford and Whitney falling into the sea, unable to get back. And then later on, we see Rainsford's efforts to survive in the jungle throughout the most dangerous game, which are all examples of man against nature in this story. Everything that goes on between Rainsford and Zareth, Rainsford and Ivan as well, are examples of man against man conflict. And at the same time, of course, we do have the conflict of man against himself. As you mentioned, when he's dealing with this newly found feeling of terror, of fear, of whether to take part in this game or not, whether there are any other options here involved. All of these are mental and emotional conflicts that Rainsford is experiencing. So we can find all different types of conflict in this story. Questions so far? Have you got, can you tell me whether there are any examples of irony in the story as well or not? Great. So, Shahed, hunter becoming the hunted. What type of an irony is that?
What type of irony?
Yes, Hamra. Also a type of irony. But which type? Do you remember the 3 types of irony we talked about last session?
Give me a minute. Yes, Shahed. We have an instance of irony of situation here, because you have this prominent, confident hunter, a very celebrated hunter, who becomes the hunted himself. So we've got a reversal of situation here. Hence, we expect something else happens. We have an irony of situation, or situational irony, as you said. clear بچه کسی هست که ندونه چرا ما irony of situation داریم اینجا؟ خب به من بگیم ببینم اگر قرار بود که از نظر ژانری ما این داستان رو، حالا ژانر ادبیات و فیلم اینا هند این هند میرن خیلی وقتا، از نظر ژانری این داستان رو کاتگورایز بکنیم، تو چه ژانری قرار میگیره این داستان؟ دیگه شاید ما ژانرهای مختلفی داریم در ادبیات و خب حالا به تبعش در سینما. ما ژانر هارر داریم، تریلر داریم، رومنس داریم، کرایم داریم، دراما داریم، کامدی داریم. این ژانرهای مختلفی هستند دیگه. میخوام ببینم که این داستان رو شما توی چه ژانری طبقه بندی میکنید. اکشن، هارر، میستری، اینا هر کدومش یه ژانرن. یه ژانری که از همه نزدیکتر به من بگین که البته منظورم این نیست که این ستا دقیقا درست میگین، ویژگی های هر ستا این ژانرها رو دارن، ولی به یه ژانر به خصوص این داستان از همه وفادارتره. فیلاسوفی ژانر نیست. ژانر ایناییه که من بهتون گفتم: رومانس، دراما، تھریلر، اکشن، هارر، کرایم، کمدی. چه چیز این گاتیکه؟ چی باعث میشه که تو رو یاد گاتیک بندازه؟ خب حتی بیشتر از هر ژانری این داستان یادآور ژانر تھریلر هستش. چرا؟ به خاطر اینکه المان اصلی هر تھریلر ساسپنسه. ساسپنس چیه؟ The question of what is going to happen. به فارسی بهش میگیم تعلیق. You constantly ask yourself what the next step is, what is going to happen. And therefore you have a lot of excitement. So this is the most prominent feature of a thriller. And this story is full of suspense. Continually you ask yourself whether Rainsford is going to survive. Right from the moment that they fall into the sea to the very last minute at which Zareth is killed. This excitement of the unknown is continual throughout the story. So we have a very good example of thriller, and therefore many instances of suspense in the story. And this suspense begins at the very beginning of the story, at the very first sentence of the story. Let me read it to you. Off there to the right somewhere is a large island, said Whitney. It's rather a mystery. So the mystery begins here. What island is it? Rainsford asked. The old charts call it Ship Trap Island, Whitney replied. A suggestive name, isn't it? Sailors have a curious dread of the place. I don't know why, some superstition. So, not only are our two characters introduced to us, but also we are given hints about some sort of mysterious island. An island that we are going to find out later in the story that is very notorious, and we understand why. And this suspense never stops. When Rainsford steps into the island, is faced with some enormous chateau. Again, the mystery goes on. Again, the suspense goes on. Where is it? Who the inhabitants of this chateau are? And then you see the very mysterious Ivan. The very mysterious Ivan is then introduced to you. And then you see General Zareth, who is this very good-looking, charming, civilized, aristocratic character. And then he begins talking about some sort of game. What type of a game is this? And then the game begins. Who is going to win? So all throughout the story, we've got an ongoing suspense. And this turns the story into a very faithful example of a thriller. Are you with me? So as we read in the story, the manhunt begins with a sort of dilemma. Rainsford has got 3 choices, all of which are very much undesirable to him. He can hunt men with Zaroff, he can let himself be hunted, or he can submit himself to being tortured by Ivan. Again, the atmosphere of suspense is seen. Let me ask one of you to talk a little bit about Rainsford. من نمیدونم اینایی که علامت هدست داره جلوی اسمشون یعنی میکروفون ندارن. اگر میکروفون ندارن بر من تایپ کنن. شکیبا یکم میتونی در مورد رینسفورد صحبت بکنی و اینکه چه ویژگی های بارزی توی این شخصیت میتونی نام ببری؟
That was the fucking reason.
بچه شما هم همزمان لطفا به سوال من فکر کنید. رینسفورد رو با چه صفات و یا با چه ویژگی هایی میتونید توصیف کنید؟ شکیبا هستش توی کلاس صدای منو میشنوه؟ خب نیستش. حسین تو میتونی به من بگی در مورد رینسفورد؟
Wait.
الهام میتونی در مورد رینسفورد بهمون بگی؟ خب الهام هم نیستش. شهرزاد میتونی در مورد رینسفورد بهمون بگی؟ خب الهام هم دیدم. الهام در مورد رینسفورد بهمون بگو و شهرزاد هر دوتون اگه میخواین تایپ کنید تایپ کنید. تا زمانی که شهرزاد و الهام دارن به ما میگن ایده هاشون رو، بچه به این دقت بکنید که کانورسیشن اول داستان کانورسیشن مهمیه. اگه یادتون باشه جلسه پیش من در مورد اهمیت جزئیات توی داستان کوتاه علل خصوص بهتون گفتم و اینکه ما معمولا چیز اضافه نداریم توی داستان کوتاه. پس بنابراین کانورسیشن اول داستان نه تنها نقشش اینه که 2 شخصیت به شما معرفی کنه، ویتنی و در واقع رینسفورد، بلکه همچنان میخواد چیزهایی در مورد شخصیت اصلی شما و یا پروتاگونیست شما هم بهتون بگه. چه چیزهایی ما از توی این کانورسیشن در مورد رینسفورد متوجه میشیم؟ مهمترین مطلبی که توی این کانورسیشن عنوان میشه نگاه رینسفورد به چیزیه که هابیشه و توش خیلی معروفه، هانتینگ، که بهش میگه the best sport in the world. به این چند خط نگاه بکنید. Rainsford is not like any other prey that Zaroff has hunted before. His experience and his variety of the hunting book, he has knowledge very well. So as Zaroff defines it, he's more intelligent than his previous preys. این چند خط نگاه کنید. We get the best sport in the world, agreed Rainsford. For the hunter, amended Whitney, not for the Jaguar. Don't talk rot, Whitney. You're a big game hunter, not a philosopher. Who cares how a Jaguar feels? But the Jaguar does, observed Whitney. They've no understanding. Even so, I rather think they understand one thing: fear. The fear of pain and the fear of death. Nonsense, laughed Rainsford. The hot weather is making you soft, Whitney. Be a realist. The world, something very important, the world is made up of two classes, the hunters and the huntees. Luckily, you and I are hunters. خیلی خوب. همین چند تا خط خیلی خیلی مهمه. پس بنابراین we get to know that the world is made up of two classes, the hunters and the hunted. He says that hunting is the best sport in the world. Why? Because he categorizes himself as a hunter. This actually is very, very similar to the conversation with General Zareff after lunch. There, the general reveals his ideology about hunting. He also divides the people of the world into two classes, the strong and the weak. So when Rainsford disagrees with Zareff, you begin to think how similar this conversation is with the one that he had with Whitney at the beginning of the story. He categorizes the world into the hunter and the hunted. This is very similar to the strong and the weak. Yet when the situation is reversed, when Rainsford, as a very eminent, prominent hunter, becomes the hunter himself, this classification becomes absurd to him, becomes nonsense. Not very much so, not very much a matter of natural selection, because in that case, you cannot see this reversal of situation so promptly. So you see that in a matter of minutes, the position of power is drastically changed. The hunter, very much confident and arrogant in this quality of him, turns into the hunted, the weak one. So Rainsford is regarded as a round character. Later in the course, I'm going to talk to you about different types of characters, but very shortly, a round character is a character that undergoes a change. So at first, Rainsford did not care about how his prey felt. He only cared about gaining pleasure from the sport. When he became the prey, he developed feelings of fear, of terror. In this case, fear and terror motivated him to win. Is General Zareff also a round character? So that's why we call him a flat character, a character that doesn't undergo any change. He remains the same throughout the story. He toyed with Rainsford's mind from the moment he met him to the moment he believed he had won the game. So throughout the story, ironically, a hobby which used to be so enjoyable to Rainsford turns into a very dreadful competition for survival. Anything you would like to add about Rainsford and his character? اوکی. خب من از الهام سوال پرسیدم و جوابم رو نگرفتم. هم رو در مورد این اروگنس صحبت میکنیم. اروگنس خیلی ویژگی پرومیننتیه تو رینسفورد. حالا باید ببینیم که این اروگنس از بین میره یا باقی میمونه. زهرا یکم در مورد جنرال زارف صحبت کنیم. در مورد جنرال زارف چی میتونیم بگیم؟ زهرا هستی؟ اینکه من شماها رو صدا میکنم و اسمتون اینجا هست ولی نیستید. همزمان با زهرا همراه خودت رو در مورد زرف برام بنویس یکم. چه ویژگی هایی توی زرف به چشمتون میاد که براتون مهمه؟ یعنی چشمگیرن اگر میخواین در مورد زرف صحبت کنیم. Zahra, that's because you have not read the story? پس در واقع بر اساس چیزی که همراه میگه اروگنس یه ویژگیه که توی زرف و رینسفورد مشترکه. بچه ها آیا ما میتونیم بگیم که رینسفورد و زرف مثل ریفلکشن هم میمونن؟ یعنی یه جاهایی خیلی یادآور هم دیگه هستن. آیا شما هم این شباهت رو میبینید بینشون؟ پس در واقع بچه‌ها خیلی ویژگی هایی که ما در مورد رینسفورد میتونیم در موردش صحبت بکنیم در مورد زرف هم صدق میکنه. یعنی زرف هم یک شکارچی بسیار قدرتمنده. زرف هم از این بازی، از این شکار، حالا اون بهش میگه سپورت، این بهش میگه گیم، خیلی لذت میبره. و یک شباهت خیلی خیلی مهم بین این دوتا هست. اینها عاشق شکارن تا زمانی که برندن. چرا رینسفورد از شکار لذت میبره؟ Because he's always the winner. Because he's the strong one. The moment the situation is reversed, the feeling changes. Why does Zaraf enjoy the game so much? Because he is confident that he will be the winner. That is why, although he invites Rainsford to take part in this game, he does not provide him with an equal chance. Look, the island is his territory. He's familiar with every inch of the land, whereas Rainsford is a newcomer, a visitor. Zareth has got a pistol, whereas Rainsford is provided with only a knife. Why so? Because he wants the game to go on, he wants the game to happen, but also wants to assure that he's the winner, the old-time winner. It is enjoyable because it's a one-way win for the hunter. And this is also something common in these two characters. The old-time winner, Rainsford, is now at the danger of losing his life. And that is a game-changing transformation here. Zareth is very much assured that he's going to be the winner. That is why early in the game, when he sees Rainsford, he turns a blind eye to him because he wants the game to go on, knowing that he's going to win eventually. Again, we see some sort of irony in the character of General Zaroff. We get some descriptions in the story that he's full of contradictions. He has peaceful behavior. His voice is cultivated, is aristocratic in manner, in his talks. Everything in his appearance is in sharp contrast with what goes on in his mind. So in a sense, he's a man with two faces, one like a gentleman and the other like a beast. So exactly. But since Muhammad mentioned it, do you think it is of any significance that Zaroff is a Russian character against an American character? Likely. Yes. Zaroff could be of any nationality, but the author chooses him as someone from the Soviet Union. The story has been written in the early 1920s, at the peak of all, let's say, the conflict between the USA and the Soviet Union. This is also something that can be regarded as important. So در واقع حالا اگر که بخوایم یه ذره بزرگتر از این تصویر رو تصور بکنیم، یعنی فرض رو بر این بگیریم که حالا ما یه کانفلیکتی داریم بین دو تا شخصیت داستان، بین پروتاگونیست و انتاگونیستم. توی لول بالاتر انگار که یه کانفلیکت داریم بین دو تا نشنالیتی. حتی اگر نخواهیم این رو لحاظ کنیم، ما یه کانفلیکت داریم بین یک فرد قدرتمند و یک فرد ضعیفتر. شاید برای همینه که جنرال زارف به یک شخصیتی بزرگتر از جنرال زارف تبدیل میشه. یعنی انگار که دیگه هر دیکتاتوری، هر ابرقدرتی میتونه باشه. هر ابرقدرتی که برای حفظ قدرت و جایگاهش هیچ محدودیت اخلاقی و در واقع انسانی رو لحاظ نمیکنه و قدرت رو به هر نحوی میخواد که نگه داره. من به یاد میارم یک جمله خیلی معروف از هیتلر رو که میگه It is not the truth that matters but victory. خب این ماتو ظرف هم هست. این ماتو هر آدم صاحب قدرتی هست که تبدیل به یک ابرقدرت دیکتاتور میشه. بنابراین داستان ما یک سطح داستانی داره که همین چیزی که مشخصه و تو داستان میخونیم و at the same time میتونه معنای گسترده تر و در واقع کلی تری داشته باشه. میتونه حتی آرکیتایپ باشه. بله میتونه باشه نیست الان، ولی میتونه، چون آرکیتایپ باید این ویژگی هایی داشته باشه دیگه، ویژگی های در واقع کهن‌تر و باستانی‌تری رو یادآور بشه، ولی میتونه یه استریوتایپ باشه. فکر می‌کنم استریوتایپ کلمه بهتریه. stereotype of any dictator, of any person with power, position, the upper hand. خب بچه سوال ندارید الان دیگه؟ شاید خبر بدی که برات دارم اینه که ادبیات مدرن دهه‌های زیادیه که از مارال فاصله گرفته. اصلا رسالت ادبیات دادن مارال نیست. رسالت ادبیات اینه که باعث بشه تو فکر بکنی. اصلا قرار نیست به تو درس اخلاق بده. این هنر برای اخلاقیات سالهای خیلی زیادیه که منتفی شده. اصلا ادبیات قرار نیست به تو یک راهی نشون بده، به تو یک منشی رو دیکته بکنه، به تو یک درس اخلاقی بده که تو دنبالش بری. ادبیات قراره یه تلنگری به تو بزنه که تو فکر کنی. بنابراین فکر کنم اصلا کار عبثیه کلا که تو دنبال مارال بگردی توی یه داستان. هیچی مارال نداره. مارالش همینه که تو در موردش الان حرف میزنیم، شهرزاد در مورد پایانش رو بسیار مهمه. این قراره به تو این تفکر رو در واقع بده که آدم در قدرت و در ضعف چه میکنه، نگاه انسان ها در زمانی که در مسند قدرت هستن، زمانی که در مسند قدرت نیستن چقدر میتونه متفاوت باشه. این جنگ دائم و آنگوینگ بین فرد قدرتمند و فرد ضعیفتر چه ویژگی ها و چه ابعادی داره. و بنابراین من فکر میکنم که همه اینها کاریه که این داستان با شما میکنه. امیدوارم که همینقدر باشه. من از داستانی که به من درس اخلاق بده یا به من بگه چی درسته و چی غلطه خوشم نمیاد. حالا بریم سراغ پایان داستان. میخوام توجهتون رو جلب بکنم به آخرین جمله داستان. خب قبلش بهتون بگم که خب در ادامه حرفمون در مورد ژانر تریلر که این داستان درش قرار میگیره، خب ستینگمون هم خیلی مهم میشه دیگه. یعنی در واقع این داستان خیلی وفاداره به ژانر، حالا هم به خاطر ساسپنس های زیادی که داره، هم به خاطر ستینگی که توش قرار گرفته. نگاه بکنید که این داستان توی یک جزیره آیسولیتد اتفاق میفته، هیچ نشانی از سیویلایزیشن توش نمیبینید، یه رازآلودگی توی این جزیره هست. اصلا تو بفهمید این ماجرای این گیم چیه، چی میخواد از رینسفورد و همه اینها. یه آیلند unnamed توی Caribbean آیلند و در واقع خب همین هم باعث میشه که همین unnamed بودنش، همین mysterious بودنش میتونه باعث بشه که شما راحت‌تر بتونید generalize بکنید. مثل هر آیلندی که حالا به خاطر المان‌های میستریسش میتونه داستان تھریلر رو جلو ببره. فرق ژانر با تم چیه؟ ژانر یک چارچوب کلیه که یک قواعدی داره. مثلا شما توی ژانر رمانس یک چارچوبی دارید، یک تجربه و یک اتفاق عاطفی بین شخصیت‌های شما میفته. توی ژانر کرایم یک چارچوبی داره. حالا اینا یک عالمه ویژگی داره، من دارم ویژگی پرامیننتش رو میگم که سادهش کنم. توی ژانر کرایم خب یک جرمی اتفاق افتاده که یک مجرمی داره و در واقع یک مجری قانونی شده احتمالاً داره. توی ژانر میستری یک اتفاقی افتاده که توضیحش ساده نیست، ما به دنبال جوابی برای سوال‌هامون هستیم. توی ژانر تھریلر شما تمام مدت با علامت سوال همراه با هیجان روبرو هستید. هیجان پیدا کردن اینکه چی قرار اتفاق بیفته. این میشه ژانر. از یک چارچوب کلی که داستان توش اتفاق میفته. حالا ما در ادامه ترم در مورد تم حرف میزنیم. تم و یا درون مایه معادل فارسیش در واقع مثل ژانر علمی تخیلی که در واقع یک ویژگی هایی داره. بنابراین شما شباهت هایی بین تمام آثاری که تو ژانر علمی تخیلی اتفاق میفتن پیدا میکنید. درسته که آثار با هم متفاوتن، ولی ژانر علمی تخیلی یعنی چی؟ یعنی المان‌های تخیلی توش وجود داره که برخلاف رئالیسمی که شما در زندگی روزمره‌تون باهاش در تماس هستید. این تو تمام نمونه‌های علمی تخیلی دیده میشه با اینکه داستان‌های متفاوتی هستن. پس این ژانر. حالا تم در واقع درون مایه یک سری ویژگی‌های منحصر به یک داستان به خصوص هستن. مثلا توی این داستان که تھریلره، بذارید من مثلا 3 تا داستان تھریلر یه خطی بهتون بدم. رینسفورد، جنگ بین رینسفورد و زارث. این یکیش. یک قاتل زنجیره‌ای که داره سعی میکنه یک قربانی دیگرش رو شکار بکنه. این یکیش. یک فردی که داره سعی میکنه از اعضای مافیایی که دورشون زده فرار بکنه. یک ساختمونی که یک برج بزرگی که یک مهمونی خیلی پرجمعیتی توش داره برگزار میشه و دچار آتش سوزی شده و حالا آدم‌ها باید سعی بکنن که از این آتش فرار کنن. همه اینا تھریلر بودن. درسته؟ پس ژانرشون یکی. ولی اینها ممکنه تم‌های مختلفی داشته باشن، درون مایه‌های مختلفی داشته باشن. یکیش ممکنه در مورد مسئله مرگ باشه، یکیش در مورد مسئله جنسیت باشه یا قدرت یا عدم توازن قدرت بین زن‌ها و مردها باشه. یکی ممکنه در مورد نژاد باشه، یعنی یه نژاد قدرتمندتر یا یک نژاد تحت ستم قرار گرفته تر. اینا میشن درون مایه هاش. یکی میتونه دغدغه مرگ داشته باشه، یکی دغدغه کانسپت اخلاق داشته باشه، یکی در مورد عشق به هم نوع تاکید بکنه. این میشه درون مایه که توی داستان‌های مختلف میتونه متفاوت باشه. پس ژانر چارچوب کلیه، یک قالب در واقع که تو داستانت رو میریزی توش. درون مایه با داستان تو فرق میکنه. یعنی ممکنه که یک داستان در واقع تمرکز اصلی داستانه. تمرکز اصلی داستان تو میشه فیلم که داستان‌های مختلف توی یه ژانر میتونن فیلم‌های متفاوت داشته باشن. سوالت رو جواب دادم؟ خب برگردیم سر جمله آخر داستان. بخونیمش کنم. He had never slept in a better bed, Rainsford decided. حالا در مورد این جمله آخر حرف بزنیم. بفرمایید. من چند دقیقه ساکت میشم، شما نظراتتون رو بفرمایید. من اصلا مایکم رو آف میکنم، فقط میخونم. لطفا همتون شرکت کنید و به سوال من جواب بدید. جمله آخر داستان یعنی چی؟
جمله خلاصی.
خب پس بنابراین با توجه به تمام چیزایی که شما نوشتید موافقم. شاید جمله بی‌نظیریه. شاید سوال اصلی ما بعد از خوندن داستان این باشه: Is Rainsford going to turn into another Zareth? جمله داستان یک جایی تموم میشه که you really don't know. You only have speculations. Is he changed as a result of the experience he went through? Did he develop some sort of sympathy towards the prey? Did he get to understand how being the weaker one feels? He said, hunting is the best part, of course, if exactly, Hamra, exactly. So, is he changed as a result of this experience? Or when he says that he had never slept in a better bed before, referring to the bed of Zareth, of course, is he going to turn into another Zareth now that he is again the strongest, now that he is again the winner, and now that he has enjoyed the game? This is the question the story ends with. How you feel, how you interpret the story is totally open to debates. But the last sentence of the story is also suggestive of the possibility of Rainsford turning into another Zareth because of the comfort Is this a comfort because he has managed to survive? Yes, maybe. But is this also a sort of comfort because of being in a position of power again? Most probably. فرشاد ما اصلا اطمینان نداریم تو ادبیات، فقط اسپکیولیشن داریم. یعنی اگر میخواستیم با اطمینان در موردش بدونیم، نویسنده باید به ما ادامه داستان رو هم میگفت. یعنی میگفت مثلا Rainsford began to understand how the prey felt at the moments of terror and fear and decided that he will never again act so brutally towards the weak. Yeah, Rainsford got to know how power felt again and began to enjoy this most dangerous game and thought about pursuing it in the future. ببین فرزاد، من دوباره حرفم رو تکرار میکنم. ادبیات در واقع قلمرو تفکره. ادبیات به تو یک برش از زندگی رو میده. خیلی وقتها داستان از یه جایی شروع میشه و تو قبلش رو نمیدونی. خیلی وقتها داستان یه جایی تموم میشه و تو بعدش رو نمیدونی. تمام زیبایی ادبیات در این عدم قطعیتشه. به خاطر اینکه اون قرار نیست به تو یک جواب بده. اون قراره تو رو به فکر فرو ببره. و همین که من و تو داریم الان بعد از 100 سال این داستان رو میخونیم و در مورد این صحبت میکنیم که چه اتفاقی برای رینسفورد میفته، یعنی که این داستان داره کار میکنه. یعنی این سوال در ذهن من و تو به وجود اومده. ادبیات قراره از ما سوال بپرسه، قرار نیست به ما جواب بده. این اصلا ویژگی ادبیاته. میدونی؟ برای همین حالا اگر اسمش رو تعلیق بذاری، من نمیدونم که آیا این یه تعلیق محسوب میشه یا نمیشه، ولی به هر حال این پایان باعث میشه که تو فکر بکنی. وزنه سنگین‌تر ماجرا به سمتیه که رینسفورد احتمالاً یک ظرف دیگه خواهد شد، چون این جمله خیلی کوتاه و تکان دهنده و تاثیرگذاره. یعنی میتونست این جمله نباشه. اگر این جمله نبود همه چی عوض میشه، ولی این جمله هست. این نویسنده انتخاب کرده که داستانش رو با این جمله تموم کنه و این جمله معناداره. پس احتمالاً رینسفورد ظرف دیگری خواهد شد. ولی این رو با این قطعیت نمیگه، چون این خیلی احمقانه است. یعنی این خیلی دیترمینیستیک و ساده انگارانه است. چون تو لحظه‌ای که داستان تموم میشه تازه این حس قدرت داره تجربه میشه. اصلا اینا که حسای آگاهانه‌ای نیست که بعد رینسفورد الان آگاهانه فکر میکنه که بله پس من از این به بعد این بازی رو ادامه میدم. نه، اون فقط داره داستان به تو یه لحظه میده. میگه در اون لحظه هیچ تختی آسوده تر از این تجربه نکرده. این سجستیوه، یعنی ادبیات جای سجستشنه، جای سپکیولیشنه. نمیدونم چقدر میتونم منظورم رو بهت منتقل بکنم. همراه این یه برداشته. من میتونم در مورد رهبران حرف بزنم، میتونم در مورد جوامع صحبت بکنم، میتونم در مورد گروه‌های سیاسی صحبت بکنم. میام داستان به تو یک خط داستانی مشخص میده، ولی مفاهیم داستان عمیق‌تر و بزرگتر از این دو شخصیت هستن. بنابراین اینا همه خوانش‌هایی که با این داستان میان. خب آیا ما سوالی داریم سر اینکه پروتاگونیست و انتاگونیست ما کیا هستن؟ چون الان تو کلاس قبلی این بحث مطرح شد ازتون میپرسم. البته که ما بعداً در مورد پروتاگونیست و انتاگونیست هم صحبت خواهیم کرد. گفتم آیا ما سوالی داریم در مورد اینکه پروتاگونیست و انتاگونیست این داستان کیا هستن یا مشخصه؟
Yeah.
بله. خب پس اگر همتون موافقین که رینسفورد پروتاگونیست و ظرف انتاگونیست، پس حتما کلیر شده. ما برای جلسه آینده یه مقدار در مورد پلات حرف میزنیم و استراکچر و چه معنایی دارن در داستان و بعد در مورد داستان Everything That Rises Must Converge از فلانری اوکانر شگفت انگیز صحبت خواهیم کرد. اون داستان هم مثل داستان امروز کوتاه نیست، بنابراین تایم کافی بذارید برای خوندنش. لطفاً دقیق بشین، در مورد شخصیت‌هاش فکر کنید. ما در موردشون اینجا حرف میزنیم و بنابراین خیلی بهتره که شما از قبل بهش فکر کرده باشید. و داستان جالبی، اصولا فلانری اوکانر نویسنده جالبی، نویسنده پر از سورپرایزه. بنابراین داستان رو بخونید، امیدوارم از داستان خوشتون بیاد. اگه خوشتون نیومد هم هیچ اشکالی نداره، نگرانش نباشید. ما مجبور نیستیم هر داستانی رو که میخونیم دوست هم داشته باشیم. یعنی اگر خوشتون نیومد احساس دیسکامفورت نکنید که پس چرا من از این داستان خوشم نیومد. خب خوشتون نیومد، مهم نیست. من دیگه صحبتی ندارم با شما. اگه سوالی ندارید، دو نکته‌ای نیست، من ازتون خداحافظی کنم. شما روز خوبی داشته باشید. تا هفته بعد.
We are good.
You are currently the only person in this conference.
باش بالا.